Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. It's Saturday, October the 26th, and it's 8:26 p.m. where I'm at. And tonight, I feel myself climbing back into my podcasting boots. I got knocked out of my rhythm there for about a week by getting super busy at work. But I think this one should be okay. Now I'm going to begin with a clip, and I'm going to tie into a lot of stuff that's out there, including Cliff High and other stuff, and we're going to take it from there.
This is a fascinating story, and this shows us that interesting times are afoot. The plot thickens. We're about to careen off into a whole new civilization, a whole new shared reality, and what we demonstrated here is indicative of that. You need to know who Cliff High is. This is Cliff High. He is a genius, an eccentric genius, a former computer programmer, a scholar, a student of history, a student of linguistics, a Renaissance man, so to speak. Cliff High discovered long ago that humanity has a shared group consciousness, and that consciousness is able to predict the future. That all of us, all the time, are communicating things about the future that bubble up in our subconscious awareness. And what he discovered was that when people communicate, unknowingly, they're talking about the future. So people could be online in a Martin Guitar Appreciation Forum, a Petunia Gardening Forum, Mustang Car Owners Club, a political forum, and without knowing it, the language that they use has clues about future events. And Cliff High wrote a computer program that goes, WebBots, that go scour the internet, collect all this data, and he runs it through, crunches it through his program, and he's able to successfully show how future events bubble up into human consciousness. The best one he ever did that I saw was his prediction of the 2008 financial crisis, the stock market collapse, and he had it to the very week. I mean, it was a really precise and accurate prediction. He's had many, many more. So he had data some years ago that there would be what he calls a temporal marker. There would be an event that he knew that when this happened, it would kick off what he calls sci-fi world. It would be one of the springboards for the new civilization that's rapidly approaching. And what he saw was something involving an interview with Joe Rogan, and he determined that it was probably going to be Donald Trump. And so he was waiting to see that. And that was tasked out to our remote viewers under double-blind protocol. So we're working, this was 4 years ago. It was the spring or early summer of 2020. We were given a blind tasking. And what they give us is just a random set of letters and numbers that's generated by a randomizer program. So in this case, they give us A1, X4-M5, Y1. We don't know it's for Cliff High. We have no idea it involves a possible interview with Joe Rogan. We don't know anything about it. It could be something in the past, something in the future, present time, political, scientific, financial. anything. It could be anything, and we go about it completely blind. So I'm working this target, A1X4M5Y1. What do I get? Something very specific. I saw Joe Rogan interviewing Donald Trump, and I recognized them. And I said, man, they're going to have this discussion. It's going to be his podcast, and they're going to talk about everything from UFOs to politics. It will be risque. It will be one of the most viewed podcasts of all time. It will be historic. And so that was July of 2020. We're in the midst of the 2020 election. Joe Rogan never interviewed Donald Trump in that year. As a matter of fact, he said, I'm not going to interview that guy. He's a son of a bitch, and I'm not going to give him time. No, he's not coming on. So it didn't happen, but it was speculated that it would, and some of us thought, was that the feedback? Was it just them talking about it? Does that fulfill the prediction? And I was going, no, I saw him doing the interview, and Cliff High said, no, I saw him, my data says there will actually be an interview, but it didn't happen. So we thought, election comes, Trump doesn't win, he goes to Mar-a-Lago, he's out of the scene, and life goes on. So was that a miss? Well, here we are in 2024, and suddenly out of nowhere, Trump goes on the Joe Rogan podcast. And Cliff High talks about how all of our individual consciousnesses, those of us in remote viewing in his predictive world, and even Joe Rogan, how we cooperated within consciousness.
And in 2020, we're both thinking, because of what Dick Allgaier had gotten, that was going to be the case, that we're going to have a two-person interview, face-to-face, a lot of two shots, that sort of thing, and fantastic discussion.
And Joe Rogan even mentioned it unknowingly in the interview where they were talking about how Donald Trump came on, and Rogan said, well, it's about the timing.
Once they shot you, I was like, he's got to come in here. It's all about timing. It's all about the timing.
Timing's
I think
good.
our timing's perfect.
Yes, it is all about the timing. So what is my take on this? Okay, first of all, it's my knowledge and my experience that consciousness is a dimension. What is time? Time is consciousness observing. So in order to have linear time, you have to have a consciousness that is in a seemingly linear reality, which is us inhabiting these bodies in this apparent 3D physical world where time, our observation of time is linear. But when you're in a consciousness outside of this physical reality, and we all have a collective subconscious awareness that is in this dimension of consciousness, Cliff knows that, and we know that as remote viewers, that's where time becomes a little bit more fluid. It becomes nonlinear, so we're able to do things like this. And Cliff High mentioned that in a recent Substack.
Now, local consciousness, we know, because this is visible, because there are people like Dick Allgaier and myself and others who are looking at time in a different way now that this event is manifesting, and we know the history of the remote viewing of it in detail, because we participated, because we lived through these years and did this shit, and we're looking at things in a different way. Universe, so we know, us guys anyway, we know universe wants us to know this. It would not manifest unless there was a point to it.
So the remote viewing was correct. It was just 4 years early. Cliff High's prediction of that event was correct from his web bots, but what it points to is what he calls sci-fi world, an inflection point, a pivot point of humanity, and we're at that. If you're paying any attention at all, you know that we're about to careen off. Humanity is into a whole new dimension, and we've been talking about it at futureforecastinggroup.com for quite some time, the transition to a new financial system, and by financial system we mean the accounting system of humanity, the accounting of how the souls and physical beings on this earth are accounted for and how the financial system manages all of that. Futureforecastinggroup.com. Join today. You'll see more interesting stuff like this. We're doing remote viewing every week. We've got some.
Well, there you go. Who can say it wasn't an exciting week? I ended up watching the Rogan and Trump podcast. I skipped over a lot of stuff. I just kind of cherry-picked stuff here and there. I didn't find it tremendously insightful or revelatory outside of this context, the context of Cliff High and the remote viewing and all of these things. Now, what I want to talk about tonight, what this podcast Rolls is about, is where we fit into all of this. Like, you must be asking yourself as you go through this material. I know I did when I went through various stages of realization through the years. Is there any such thing as free will? So if you can predict the future, that means future is already happened. It just hasn't discharged into the linear timeline yet. And if that's true, and it is for the most part, I'm going to put a footnote here to talk about co-creating at a later stage of this podcast. Let's see if I can remember that. I'm notorious for weaving all over the place and forgetting place markers I leave in my own podcast, and I don't finish thoughts sometimes. I apologize for that, but it's just the way the Talamanca Review comes out, right? I live in non-linear time, all right? And I mean, it's one of the affectations of a lot of meditation is that you start to live in non-linear time. And this place where I live now certainly accentuated that and propelled me even further into living outside of time, or adhering to time only for the purposes of the body. And it's difficult for people to live with me. I mean, I can be all over the place at times. So right now I'm on some kind of schedule where I go to bed around 4:30 and I get up at 11:30. I sleep about 6 hours. And my wife gets up at 4:30 or 5. And, so she takes that kind of personally, like, why aren't you sleeping with me? And I'm like, got a lot of stuff on my mind right now. I really, kind of have to do this. And, with the work and the podcasting and all the other stuff I need to get done, I need a lot more time alone in a day than most people. I mean, I promise you don't know anyone even remotely like me. You may think you do, but you don't. You'd have to come here and live with me for a month and see it for yourself. But I like to do my qigong alone. I can't just do it in the room behind the sofa while my wife's watching TV. There's a certain energy and nowness to it that can't have any psychic interference. Same thing with meditating, and same thing with deep concentrated work. Whether it be a book I'm working on, or sometimes my work can hit that pitch as well. If I get a bunch of big clients in at the same time and I got a lot of stuff to get done. So circling back, roles. I mean, what does all this mean? Are our lives meaningless? Do we just show up and a bunch of stuff happens that was preordained by forces above our pay grade, above our consciousness grade, and we're just the recipients of things that happen to us? Or do we have any say in what happens down here? Do we have any say in our lives? And what about all the people who play significant roles in the timeline, like Trump, like Vladimir Putin, and the corollary anti-heroes, or not even anti-heroes, the antagonists to the timeline, to the if your definition of the protagonist in any story is the hero and the so are we protagonists? Are we antagonists? Are we non-playing characters? Who are we? Very important question, and it's the beginning of a long spiritual search. Okay? And what about all the people who come in to play these significant roles, like the people I just mentioned, and the antagonists like Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, Klaus Schwab, Yuri Haval? And these people are like stones tied to a rope. Okay, so just imagine a big stone tied to a rope. And their job is to get themselves attached to the air balloon so the air balloon can't rise. That's what they do. It's a bit of a clumsy metaphor, but if you think about it, if you contemplate it, you'll see it. Okay? So we are on the cusp of something extraordinary here. We are on the cusp of a completely new reality, and not materially and technologically, but a new comprehension reality. You can already see it. You can already see the old system falling apart. Its actors and adjutants being humiliated on a daily basis. And it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And then there's some energetic knots tied up in this timeline that are going to require more finesse to unknot. Okay? And this is how I figured out the third temple. I came to the conclusion, and this is a contemplation. It's not completely devoid of reason. It's not a purely meditative experience where the reason thinking process is absent. Is you go into a relaxed state. I mean, I don't know what remote viewing is. I mean, did I remote view this place before I moved here? It's all just terms. Okay, it's all just a big language mess. Okay, when you understand the Bible and the Quran and the Tao Te Ching and some of the Hindu stuff, you start to see that they're all saying the same thing. There's absolutely nothing new in what Cliff High and this Alighieri fellow are bringing to us. There's absolutely nothing new here. It's just every generation, every epoch. Remember on an earlier podcast I tried to explain the phenomenon of escape. So if you look at the human record, there is always this pushing against some boundary, some frontier. There's always some final expression of freedom that the human race hasn't been given yet. There's always some oppressor who has to be taken out because he or she is oppressing us and inhibiting our freedom. And many times, especially in the last 100 years or so, especially in the timeline of the devil in us, this has been very often misinterpreted as progressivism or social advancement. But progressivism, as it's sold to us now by the pundits who are trying to sell it to us, and this would be Kamala Harris, Barack Hussein Obama, Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, the usual suspects that I highlight and talk about in or on the Talamanca Review. Okay, that's who we're talking about here. Their job is to twist and pervert that impulse toward freedom by about a 3% margin. Remember what I told you in a previous podcast. You only need about 3% to convince people and to misdirect people. Okay? If you have a 97% truth and a 3% lie, the 3% lie will corrupt the 97%. Okay? And think of it like a recipe. There's something Christ says in the Gospels about the bread not rising because you didn't get the leaven right. Okay, so it's like a recipe. And that, believe it or not, that 3% is extremely important, okay? Because it's got to be like 100% to get to the final stage of the realization. So progressivism and what they've been selling us, transgenderism, transhumanism, these are all the philosophies and knowledge pools out of which these ideas come are 97% accurate. So transhumanism is the desire to be more than a human being. And every single human being who's ever lived has had the desire to be more than a human being. It's in our nature because part of us never forgets. Even though we can't clearly articulate what it is we have not forgotten, part of us never forgets. And we know that we are these extraordinary beings. But it's always this, like, right on the tip of your tongue. You can't quite bring it into focus. It's like a fly buzzing around or something, you know? You can't quite nail it down. So when we're alive, we take on roles. And some of them are necessary roles. The role of father is necessary. The role of mother is necessary. The role of leader is necessary. Although what needs to be led and the scale of leadership is something that I think there's a lot of room to debate. Do we need a global leader? I would say no. No. Do we need global standards? Yeah, we need global standards. Sure. Do we need regional and local leadership? Absolutely. For the most part, we need, and that's actually a more important form of leadership than state, provincial, federal, or regional. The local leadership is extremely important because that affects a high volume of your daily life. And the more of our leadership we transpose to realms that are outside of our familiarity. Okay, so if you live in a small town, you're going to know your mayor, you're going to know your police chief. You're going to know everybody that is a salaried and a volunteer fireman. You're going to know your child's school teachers. And I mean, this is true for many, many, many Canadians and many, many Americans and many, many Australians and other countries as well. It just gets a little confusing when the scale gets too large to manage. Okay? So New York is too large a scale to manage. You can't have familiarity with everybody in New York. You can't have familiarity with everybody in Toronto. You can't have familiarity with everybody in Paris. But the way it works over here is you get a kind of natural leadership where somebody is sort of indirectly voted into a leadership role in communities. And communities over here are called pueblos or barrios. Okay? They have the word municipality. Municipalidad is municipality in Spanish. But everybody says barrio or pueblo. Where do you live? And they say the name of their barrio. And a lot of times the name of the barrio may not even be official. But when you go into that barrio, there is a strict leadership there. Very strict leadership. And it works. Okay? What am I talking about? Where am I going with this? Are we just actors? Or is there more going on here? Well, it really comes down to how you live your life. I would say that the vast majority of people on this planet are actors. And most of them don't even have talking roles. They're just extras. Okay? And that doesn't mean that if you're more than that, you're special. It just means you're further along the evolutionary path of whatever this hologram, whatever this drama, and it is a drama. Shakespeare nailed it. All the world is a stage and everyone upon it is an actor. I don't know how Shakespeare got everything so right. It's really, I think he was a spiritual figure put into our timeline, as important as Tesla, or maybe some might say Elon Musk now, or things like this. But he was definitely put into our timeline, and to give us a tremendous spiritual push forward. Because there's all these invisible forces working. Okay? So we have work to do, right? When you're alive, you have work to do. I have to get my work done to support my family. I have to get my books written to evolve myself and to clarify my own position on certain things, and to share my insights and my experience with other people, which is the best part of it. Where am I going with all this? Roles. So some roles are necessary and important, and you can be spiritually detached and fulfill those roles, like husband, father, uncle, all of these things, right? You can fulfill that role just by virtue of your bloodline and your name. And that's another aspect to what's going on down here. Although I think the whole blood thing is ending. Okay? Let's pick up one of the threads that I didn't finish. Some of the knots need to be very, very tactfully unknotted. And the one that needs to be unknotted more than any other in the West is the knot of the Jew knot. And this is producing all of the calamity in the world now. I mean, they're saying their Messiah is coming and all these things are going to happen for them and they're going to run the world. I don't think so. But because there's so much beneficial, intentional energy in the Jewish world, let me repeat that because it's an important point. There is a tremendous amount of beneficial energy, intentional energy in the Jewish world, meaning they're trying to do good, the Torah Jews. They're making sacrifices to grow their consciousness. They're trying to live up to the cultural role they've been given, which is an unbelievable role. And don't think for a moment you would be able to escape it if you were born to a Jewish family. That brand would be burned into your flesh. You are a Jew. And you would not deviate from that. Very few people do. Very few. And it's because it's such a significant, to borrow a phrase from Cliff, it's such a significant temporal marker to be a Jew in 2024. Okay? But this particular knot is being unknotted in a very delicate way because there's a lot for people to learn in this. Because once this knot is undone, a lot of things about Christianity are going to make a lot more sense, and a lot of things about Islam are going to make a lot of sense. And a general understanding of what Judaism was is going to be given to the human race. And it's a very important piece of information that we need. Okay? To go forward and to let go of all of this and to stop the role. Okay? Because the Jew role has to stop, the Christian role has to stop, and the Muslim role has to stop. We're going into a completely different reality matrix now. So whatever it is that sets down the reality here, it's temporal. It's temporary. I'm not quite sure how long periods last. I haven't done what you would call an extensive study into the yugas or anything like that. But I think every few thousand years, the forces above us just shake our reality like an Etch-a-Sketch. You know what an Etch-a-Sketch is, right? You take the dry pen and you can draw on it, and then you shake it and the picture you drew disappears. Remember that when you were a kid? That's an apt metaphor for how this reality works. And so the things we produce and we manifest in this reality are based upon the imaginative fertilizer that we're given. That which fertilizes the imagination. And this is why Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Jesus, and Muhammad have been so dominant for the last 2,000 years. But now we have a whole bunch of new spiritual fertilizer, new things to think about. And what's important about the age we're going into is these things are going to be literally understood now. They're not just going to be mythologically canonized, you know, like the crucifixion and the resurrection and all of this stuff in Christianity, and the killing of the animals and the building of the temple. All of these things are completely unnecessary. And in many ways, they will be looked upon as superstitious, primitive, and quite frankly, stupid by future us looking back on this. But future us is going to go through what we're all beginning to sense now. Alighieri, the remote viewer, Cliff High, myself, most of you as my listeners, that this time wave zero that Terence McKenna talked about is almost on us. And when it happens, our understanding of reality will completely and utterly change. Completely and utterly change. And it'll never go back to being normal again. The role we play here is that of perceiver. Everything else is a minor role. So, when you are in your eternal role, you have no fear. When you are in a temporary role, you're constantly laden with fear. What happens to me when I die? Because you think you're the body, but you're not the body. The real statement is what happens when the body dies. But by affixing a pronoun, a possessive pronoun, like what happens to me when I, the flesh, dies, is a wrong question right out of the gate. You are never born and you never die. You inhabit bodies. Okay? And the frequency of the body and the frequency of this reality is so dense that by about 12, 13, 14 years old, very few consciousnesses can get out of it. Okay? And very few randomly. Okay? But the lineage paths maintain themselves as kind of like, almost like Hogan's Heroes. You know, perpetually trying to break out of that Nazi prisoner of war camp from the TV show Hogan's Heroes. Or The Great Escape with Steve McQueen and Charles Bronson. And if you look at our behavior for the last number of centuries, we're always trying to escape something. Do you notice that pattern? You see it quite a bit, like with these enraged college students going on and on about the Palestinians and the young Hebrews going on and on, playing their roles, which is a Jew in the time of the Messiah. And never been a more important time to be a Jew, I suspect, than in the time of the Messiah. And they're all rallying behind that now. I don't think it's going to come to much, but the temple's going to get built. Okay? It's going to get built. And what that's going to do for our roles and our sense of ourselves is it's going to be almost the opposite of the Trump-Rogan interview and the foreshadowing of it by both the remote viewers and Cliff High's web bots giving the psychic data, okay? That is an optimistic foreshadowing or an optimistic portent. A portent is like an omen, okay? The third temple, building the temple will break all spells. And I don't think the rabbis understand this. They think they're going to be able to reinforce spells. And we're going to go back to business as usual, you know, with the darker Jews, which is raping and murdering the Goy and enslaving the Goy, because that's what they've been doing since they got banking, since they got released in the Renaissance. Okay? I don't mean to be too hard on them. Like I said, it's all just roles. Okay? But the Jew role is a very powerful role. Very powerful role, especially in the early 21st century. Most people in Judaism now, especially if they're Orthodox, believe this is the summation of their entire existence. However long they've been alive in multiple bodies. This is the summation point. I'm here to tell you that it's all going to happen because this particular knot has to be very patiently and gracefully unknotted. Other things will just be cleaved because the forces above are just cutting them loose. And a lot of times there may be violence associated with this. But just realize that it's like from the body of humanity and the consciousness of humanity as a collective, working with the consciousness of the planet, the consciousness of the solar system, and the consciousness of the galaxy, is just cutting this stuff away like cancer. It's like surgery. It's just cutting it out like cancer. Okay? And the people who can accommodate this transition, they're just going to go away like dust in the wind. Okay? They're not going to make it because they got nothing to project into this future. And that's okay too. What that means is you didn't get enough lessons at this base 3D level, and probably, again, to borrow the lexicon of Cliff, universe will accommodate you by setting you up in another 3D reality. Okay? From what I've seen and what I've observed and what I've deduced about this reality, it gives everybody what they want. But you have to understand what you're asking for and how you're asking for it. You have to understand how consciousness works. But you're going to get everything you want. If you pray to God every day for a decade or 2 decades for vengeance against somebody you perceive to have wronged you, sooner or later the universe is going to give you that opportunity for vengeance. But it's going to come with a hook in it. And that hook is attached to a line like a fishing line, and the fates are going to reel you into another circumstance that you never would have been able to predict or anticipate, because that hook got into you because you demanded vengeance. It's very fascinating the way the world works down here and the way consciousness interacts with it when you start to get a handle on it. As a general rule, I would say just don't get attached to anything. And if you're capable of letting something go, like if something gets stolen from you and it's not absolutely necessary for your survival, then let it go. If it's absolutely necessary for your survival, then you may have to go on an epic journey to get it back or to get justice, right? I'm reminded of the classic Italian film from the 1920s, The Bicycle Thief, about this guy who relies on his bicycle to make a living and his bike gets stolen one day. Okay? So we're all just playing roles down here. And you can't get too attached to your role. Okay? That's it. I think I'm good for tonight. I don't have to go to 50 minutes every night. I don't have to fill it out to some kind of pre-mandated time frame. So that's my podcast tonight on the Talamanca Review Roles. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca